we must protect the rights of citizens to protect their private medical records. We also need financial privacy. It shocked me to learn that if you deposit $10,000 in a bank, the Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network at the Department of Treasury is notified. And you are looked at as a criminal for putting money in the bank. And they begin again to look into your private papers, your private documents, your bank accounts, your phones. Be careful. Privacy and personal liberty is at the basis of the American ideal of freedom, and we can't forget that. Benjamin Franklin once said that any society that would give up liberty to gain security will deserve neither and lose both. And I am afraid that we have already given up our liberty in order to gain a little bit of security. Benjamin Franklin warned us that if this is the case, we will deserve neither and we will lose both. And the Patriot Act does just that. It expands the federal government's use of the wiretap without judicial oversight. It allows for the nationwide search warrants to be issued, and it allows for what they call a sneak and peek warrant, where you don't even have to be present for the federal government to conduct a search. They don't need your knowledge, and they don't need your consent. It also, and this is the scariest thing, because as a student, you buy textbooks, and more than anyone else, you're at the peak of your reading in your lifetime. Hopefully not, but I mean, realistically, as a student in college, you're at the peak of when and how you read. The Patriot Act actually requires libraries and bookstores to turn over records of books purchased and read by patrons. This is also something that we should be aware of, that the purchases that you're making are being recorded, and we must be careful. Ron Paul is against the Patriot Act. He stood against the Patriot Act since he voted against it when it first came out. The attempt was to push it through Congress, to slap this legislation that was as thick as you can imagine before the congressman with very little time to look over it or to understand it. And they rushed him to the floor and they said, if you're going to fight terrorism right here after September 11, 2001, then we need the Patriot Act. And the congressman rushed to the House floor and they put their card in and they voted yes. And as the years have gone on, we've begun to understand what the Patriot Act really is. So, Ron Paul's been speaking out against the Patriot Act for some time. Not only is Ron Paul against the Patriot Act, but he has been the lone voice in the Republican Party to warn us against a foreign policy that is not working. There has been a lot of discussion over whether or not Ron Paul is Republican enough to run for president in this particular party. I would argue that the Republicans that are running are not Republican enough. Ron Paul is the only Republican that stands for a humble foreign policy. One George W. Bush came out in 2000. The war in Iraq was sold to us with false information. Ideas of weapons of mass destruction, big press conferences at the United Nations. And why are we explaining ourselves to the United Nations and going to war over a resolution passed by the United Nations anyway? That's scary in its own right. The war was sold to us with false information, and it is more dangerous now than before we entered the Middle East. 4,000 lives, 4,000 American lives have been lost in this war on terror. Thousands more have been seriously injured. A very good friend of mine that I grew up with lost his hand to a grenade in Iraq. So you don't have to look very far before you can personalize this foreign policy that we now have governing our nation. We've talked about the economy already, and we already realize that we're heading towards a recession. But we are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to fight a war in which we have no business fighting. If we're going to cut spending, and if we're going to change the fiscal irresponsibility of the United States of America, it has to start with the foreign policy decisions that we make, and that starts at the White House and works itself down. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson warned the United States against entangling alliances. In the year 2008, We have troops in 130 countries. This has left our own nation and our own borders dangerously unprotected. If we have concerns about immigration, if we have concerns about the safety of the United States, then we need to return the troops from Iraq immediately and bring them home. As a history teacher, I often like to draw the parallel to the fact that the empire of Rome collapsed because it overextended itself. It began to debase its currency. It moved away from a hard system of silver to lesser and lesser metals. It overextended itself in Europe and across the Middle East. And Rome collapsed. And this is a warning. This is a warning that the United States needs to pay attention to. This idea of freedom, this idea of liberty is a new idea. These 18th century founding fathers revolted against tyranny. And what we're seeing in the United States today is that the Ron Paul Revolution is beginning to bring people together, and we are once again revolting from tyranny. The United States of America has not declared war since 1942. World War II was the last time that we declared war. If we're going to fight a war, then we need to make our congressmen stand up and vote yes or no on it. None of these resolutions from the United Nations empower to give the president the authority to do whatever they want. These are our elected officials. They need to be held responsible for the lives that are being sent and shipped across to the Middle East to fight and die. We need to have each United States congressman stand up, put their card in the machine, and vote yes or no on war. And if it is the consensus of the United States of America, then we need to declare war, we need to fight, we need to win. This is not an idea that Ron Paul came up with on his own. He didn't come up with the idea of voting to declare war because he liked the idea and liked the sound of it. These are the directions and the instructions that have been given to us by our founding fathers in the United States Constitution. We are moving farther and farther away from those directions and instructions. We need to be careful about entangling alliances. We need to return to the United States Constitution. And a lot of the candidates that are running for the Republican nomination in 2008 are doing a wonderful job at giving lip service to the United States Constitution. They love to quote it when it's convenient. They love to cherry pick the ideas of freedom and limited government when it's convenient, when it sounds good in a 30-second soundbite. But look at their records and ask yourself, how many of them have voted consistently with the United States Constitution for over 30 years? There is only one Republican candidate who is known as Dr. No. He is known as Dr. No because he votes against any piece of legislation that violates the United States Constitution, and these individuals running for president would be well served to take note. Another large problem that we have in the United States is that we contradict ourselves. In the 1980s, we began sending money to Afghanistan as the Afghanis fought against the Soviets, as the Soviet Union tried to move into Afghanistan. The United States not only pumped money and training and weapons into these Afghanis, but they trained them, they armed them, and they taught them how to fight. And the leader in Afghanistan at the time against the Soviet Union was Osama bin Laden. And now, after 20 years of giving money to, of course we didn't give the money consecutively, but when we give money to Osama bin Laden and we train them to fight against the Soviets, we ought not to look too far away to the reason that they are trained and armed to fight now. It's a contradiction. How are we going to give money to Osama bin Laden in the 1980s and turn around and make him the #1 wanted figure in all of the United States and all of the globe? It's contradictory. And it's hypocritical.